Hi, my name is Craig Resnick with the RNC Advisory Group. Thanks for joining us today. We'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Data Engineering for Industrial Analytics, Setting the Stage for Success. I think one of the reasons we're excited about it is we're all, tackling a lot of these new analytics projects, and we know how common it is to kind of focus on that end result, which is like anticipating the operational insights that you're trying to gain as a result of the project, and hopefully the money that you'll get to save as a result of the project. But really, before you can build that new real-time production dashboard or predictive quality model, there's something you need to have sorted out first, and that's the data. So today we'll have a discussion about data engineering. We'll talk about like the crucial first step that's really required for successful digital transformation of any sort of industrial analytics project. So we'll talk about things like strategies for centralizing data and data warehouses versus data lakes, and how to add meaningful content to data, and how to prepare data for consumption to different audiences. And with that, what we have is we have two special guests today. We have Kevin Jones, who's the Director of Sales and Marketing from dataParc. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey, thank you, Craig. Good to be here.
Excellent. And we have Branko Radulovic, and he's an MAS engineer from BBA Consultants. How are you today, Branko?
Very good. Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Excellent. Excellent. One of the things we wanted to talk about was, when we put this webinar together, and Kevin had told me he wanted to invite BBA. And hey, Kevin, could you just tell us a little bit about, why BBA? Why did you invite BBA to this webinar?
Yeah, Craig. So, when we're, as a software vendor working oftentimes with system integrators and other partners to do the services side, we're always looking for partners that know the space. As we were chatting before this webinar, talking about companies who know the industrial space, know the software platforms, and that's BBA. I mean, they know the industry, which is great. Where that's not always the case. But the other thing is really their approach to projects. We have a very, I'd say, practical approach and trying to solve problems both, for today and also problems for tomorrow. And BBA has a very, I'd say, regimented, approach to projects, and I think they do it the right way. So. That's why we brought Branko, and maybe, Branko can say a few words about that.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, for those of you that don't know BBA, the letters basically stand for Breton, Banville, and Associates. So those are the two smart guys that founded our company, very highly skilled engineers back in 1980. So company has been running strong for 40 plus years. So we cover the Canadian market especially. We have over 1,000 employees, and we specialize in industries such as mine and metals, renewables, biofuels, manufacturing as well. So we do a lot of cool and interesting projects that involve data, right? So in our mission, we have our 3 pillars, and that's something that we work with Kevin as well. Also, when they offer it for their customers, is to try to work in that methodology. So basically, the 3 pillars are very simple. The first one is the data engineering. So we do a lot of work around the data, how we structure it, present it. But once you have that data, what do you do with it? So the important thing is to find value in it. So the whole valorization aspect. And then finally, we do smart analytics. So everything that has to do with resolving the problems around complex issues that the customers might have, whether it be an equipment malfunctioning, predicting quality, predicting estimates, for example, for drilling different sites. So that's kind of what we do.
Oh, that's really fascinating. And I bet one of the things that you probably get involved with is having a discussion with the customers as far as kind of like what percentage of a project should be allocated to the data engineering phase. And because of that, one of the things I want to do is I want to see if we can get our listeners to respond to a poll question, and we'd like to ask them just that, which is the percentage of the project that they may consider allocating to data engineering. You can pick between 0 or less than 20% or 20 to 40% and over 40%. And one of the things that I'll do while we're waiting for some answers is I'll go back to Kevin. If you were answering this question for a majority of your dataParc customers, what would you guess they would pick? And then I'll ask Branko the same question.
Well, I think maybe we create two different answers there. What I guess they'll pick and what
Right.
the project really looks like.
Exactly. We'll hear it now.
We'll see here. But man, typically from our experience, that 20 to 40% is where we would see it. In our smaller projects, ends up actually being a larger percentage of the data engineering. Because one of the things we do in a base project is to get basically all the links to the data, all the underlying foundation in place, and then teach our customers to fish and really empower them with the easy to use tools. And so that requires that fundamental foundation of data engineering to make it easy. And so the smaller the project, oftentimes the higher the percentage.
Okay.
Interesting.
Go ahead, Branko.
Do we have the results or yeah? Well, for my I think I would say maybe around 20% at least, because just to make sure that we are aligned on the strategy. So it's super easy now these days to download a software, start configuring on your own, maybe go on YouTube a little bit, see how it's done, right? And then start delivering something, but that's one way of doing things. But I think the smart way would be just to sit down, get all the required people in the room and just talk about what is the final business value that we're trying to deliver, right? So how do we do that? One thing that we've been putting in place is the RASI chart, matrix charts, matrix. So basically assigning people, who's going to be responsible, who's going to be accountable, who should we consider consult, and then inform. So I guess that's kind of like a work frame that we propose, and then we get into a workshop. So that's how we start off this journey, I would say.
No, that's great. Now let's see if we have any results yet, so we can see.
Okay.
That's exactly what I certainly would have predicted. I would have predicted either in that 20% range as you do, Branko. And so no surprises, Branko or Kevin?
We're on a good track.
Yeah, I'd say it's good to see. I think the right recognition of what's needed.
Yeah, and there's more and more tools these days now for for the data insights. So depending, it's really what you want to solve, because it's just something that you will use to support the bigger picture, right?
Yeah, and certainly from the kind of the software vendor's perspective, we've been doing this for about 20 years now, and really tried to make data engineering part of the software product to make that phase as easy as possible. Certainly what Branko's talking about and getting the workshops and the people has to happen, but if we can make with the software, make it easy to connect to multiple data sources, make it easy to do the right data aggregation, data filtering, contextualization, then we can make that at least as easy as possible once you get into building out that foundation. And that's been a real focus of ours from the beginning.
Yeah, no, exactly. You guys have certainly done a great job of that over the years, Kevin. Just to make sure that we want to make sure that all the listeners are kind of at a level set. I'll probably start with Branko. How do you define data engineering and explain why is that important? And then we'll go to Kevin for his follow-up.
Well, first of all, again, building that roadmap, for me, that's super important when we start our projects. So once we have the people that are expressing a need or they have a problem, so we want to make sure that we get them into the same room, we'll get off a workshop. And the data engineering starts with, let's say, working on let's say, our system architecture, right? Where is this data going to come from? Do we have the necessary drivers to extract that data, pass it along? Do we need to manipulate it? Do we need approvals for that data? Who's going to be managing the security? So all that, the legal part, where's the data going to be stored? If we store it in the cloud, is this cloud public? Is it private? So there's a lot of questions to be, kind of resolved, answered. And obviously determining what are the consequences of the problems that we have, so we can try to estimate the return on investments. Okay. Engineering is also delivering, helping us get that ROI. So because we hire people, for example, a team is a data scientist, so you'll need to have somebody to analyze the data that was passed to you and then deliver solve the problem ultimately with that.
Yeah, and certainly the ROI is of critical importance. Do you see anything similar, Kevin, or is anything different with any of your customers?
Yeah, no, I think, certainly similar. But I think what's really important about the data engineering side is if you get that right, you really future-proofed your solution going forward. Oftentimes, a customer comes in with a specific problem, a specific goal, and that's what the project's kind of based around. And it's really easy to get kind of tunnel vision and just to solve that one problem. But if we get the data engineering right, not only do we solve that problem, but we solve a problem they're going to have in 2 weeks they don't even know they have. I can think of several examples with customers where maybe you mentioned a quality model that really they're concerned about controlling one of their quality parameters. It's got too much variation, causing issues, and they want to reduce that variation of their final product quality. But we get the data engineering right in the beginning, and then they tackle that. But in 6 weeks, maybe they're actually having some operational issues on the machine, on the plant. Well, we have all the data set up right. They can now solve that problem too. So I think that's one of the huge advantages. It gets you set up for future success. The problems you don't know you're going to have, but you're going to have them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because when we talk to some of our clients, let's say that they're in artificial intelligence using cloud-based solutions, and sometimes we'll hear things like, just dump all the data in one place and we'll sort it out. Just keep filling up that data lake, shall we say. From dataParc's perspective, does that represent a different approach than you would take? And then I'll ask Branko to comment on that as well.
So I would say yes and no. Certainly yes, in that we want to have access to all the data with the tool set, and so that again, it gets into solving problems you don't know you need to have. But when it comes to I'd say the advanced analytics side of things, it's different. I think we try to look, when we're doing advanced analytics, try to be a little bit more tailored, a little bit more curated with our modeling. We've done some R&D with some unsupervised modeling techniques, which is that give us the 5,000 tags related to your asset, and we'll figure out what relationships are, and the models can do an okay job with that. But what you end up with a lot of times is the old truths don't go away. Correlation is not always causation.
Sure.
And just because you've got an accurate model from when you built it, doesn't mean you have a robust model. And in industrial manufacturing, you're much better off having lower accuracy, but more robustness as the process changes, than you are having a very accurate model that doesn't work when anything changes in the plant. And that's where the subject matter experts come into play that still have to make those calls. Those are decisions to be made. And so we found better success when you can marry really good software tools with the people in the plant who know the process and can put that sort of sanity check to it.
Yeah. Would you say the same, Branko?
Well, for me, I see it as a broad subject. When we get to the data lakes and the data warehouses, so it kind of gets, I don't know if it's confusing or it became just like a given, put it there. But what's important to understand, I think, is what's included in the data lake, or how do we got there, from let's say when we started this, when a plant starts in these operations, they have an application that runs their business. So what's behind that is a database or multiple databases So those are operational databases, and they sustain the business. So you have rows and columns, and you're able to work with that. But then as the maturity of your operation grows, then somebody's going to say, hey, we need a data warehouse. Oh, okay, well, why can't we just use our smart analytics on the operational database we have? Well, you'll have somebody that's going to create a report on the side, configure it, it might work right away, but then you will impact the production because that's the database you're hitting, and you're trying to do analytics and your data analytics on that operational database, and that's not the right way to do it. So then we have data warehouses that extract, and oftentimes you'll hear an acronym ETL, which stands for extract, transform, and load the data. So that's done periodically, and then we take the data out of there, put in a data warehouse, and do aggregation, slicing, and time periods. So the advantages there is you can have a different group of people doing reports and getting operational insights and not affecting productions. So I think that's one thing. And then we have the data lake, which is another concept. So that's the AI part of things. So actually in the data warehouse, you need to be structured, right? So call this a structured data interactions. And when we get to the data lake, well, it's a mixture of data, databases, files, could be even images, videos. So this is where you kind of have a free for all. So, right, you have a unstructured data and structured data, and how do you make sense of that? So if you decided to have that without going through the regular roadmap, if you want to call it, database, data warehouse, data lakes, so it could be a little bit challenging for you. Because you do reporting there, but you're kind of getting into uncharted territory. I kind of see it, like a lake, you need a boat.
Right.
The boat, you'll have somebody that operates the boat and feeds the intel to the guy, steering. So I have an analogy for that. So you have the data engineer, who's feeding the data scientist and steering the boat, right? Because to get to that final destination, which is your business value, right? So, but you're getting information from all sources. It could be like a Twitter feeds,
Right.
Somebody that's getting, let's say they're doing a product reviews and they want to speculate sales. Well, they want to mix that Twitter feed data from, what are they saying on the market? So that's data, and data, if you don't put it in context, it's not worth much. So
That's for sure. Well,
Yeah.
I wonder too, frankly, it's kind of got me thinking that, if you kind of jump right to that, that data lake with the structured and unstructured data, I mean, do you think your customers would also miss some value along that way? Because there's certainly value at every step in that chain.
Yeah. And for the value, you can identify values at a very early steps, right? You don't need to have a data lake to have value. So maybe there's something in your little application database that could be done. If not, okay, well, we'll see if we're going to spin out a SQL server with a data warehouse analytics. Maybe we'll just stop there, and that's it for now. This is good for us. Our sales team is able to work with that. They're getting all the information on monthly reports, yearly reports. And that data also gets, updated, right? So if you're jumping into the data lakes, then that's where you also need to have a data scientist. If we define, for example, what a data scientist does, what are the qualifications? So they have to like math, they have to like, we'll talk about the modeling, we'll talk about the model accuracy, and there's a lot of stats in the back. And also in terms of the programming languages, there's the Python, right? So the Python is a very commonly spread language that is used. You can import different libraries. There's a lot of development on the latest scripts. So that's a good thing to have.
It's funny because Branko, when we're doing a lot of client projects, we get involved with all these issues of data siloing with our customers.
Yeah, that's another thing.
And they look at that as this really common pain point. And so we run into this all the time. So how do you help your customers overcome data siloing? And then I'll ask Kevin for a follow-up as well from dataParc's perspective.
Right. Yeah, so the data silo is a very common thing in the industries, especially if you have people that are specific engineers that work on those single systems and they're not, for example, willing to share the information and make it available in terms of say. And also, if we want to have a holistic overview of what's going on with the data, we need to open those, break those barriers and put the data in a single, well, as much as we can in the data warehouse where we're gonna be able to interact with it and keep the silos more for like the operational space. So, but definitely, yeah, if we could expose the data and then validate the security, right? Is the data good? Does the data need to be transformed? For example, if you a simple conversion of gallons, liters, feet, meters. So if you take the data and make sure you have to like put a right context to it. So that's something that we also analyze and make sure that once the data gets to the other point B, that it comes in a desired format.
What about some of the tools you have, Kevin, from dataParc's perspective to kind of help out with data siloing?
Yeah, I think, Craig, this is, one of the, we talk about sort of how we bake data engineering into dataParc as a product. One of the core use cases, plants have data silos everywhere. I think that the thought 10, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago, is that everything's going to end up in everything from an operational perspective is going to end up in your process historian. And companies worked hard to do that. But I think just with the explosion of data, it became really hard. And so just information gets scattered, on the OT, on the IT. So we architected dataParc from the beginning to be agnostic of a given data source. So you can connect to multiple sources, combine that data and make it look to the end user if it all comes from one place, but it in fact is coming from different places. So you can certainly go, the data warehouse route, which simplifies things and gives you a little bit more control over some of the business rules and how the data is aggregated. Certainly value there. But if we want to just connect, sort of data where it exists today, we have drivers to go to your process historian, go to your lab quality system, go to your MES, just kind of whatever your ERP system, because those are your system of record, and places do a good job of keeping that data accurate and consistent, and so just leverage it.
Yeah. And I like also the fact that the dataParc supports most of the latest historians. You have the just to name a few, GE, Pi, and you can also connect to a Prophecy MESs, because MES could have multiple databases everywhere. So it's kind of also representative of a silos. So I think that's good in your solution that you have.
Yeah, just that those, you named the kind of, I'd say, most recognizable vendors, but it's growing in the cloud space too. Whether it's Microsoft Time Series Insights or something like Snowflake. That I don't think that's slowing down. So if we can make sure we connect to data sources wherever they are and make that data available to users across organization, no matter where they are, then we can really empower people.
Yeah, it's interesting because when it comes to data, another area, when you talk about trying to, identify the data and properly utilize the data and kind of be able to sort it out between data that becomes actionable versus data that really you shouldn't be spending any time on. So we get involved with a lot of, I would say, is, applying contextualization, to the data. So I'll start with Branko and then go to Kevin. What's your take on the whole contextualizing data? And And how do you add in your projects, context to data, and do you consider that part of data engineering?
Yeah, definitely. Well, my expertise is mostly around MES systems, so manufacturing execution systems. And when we talk about to our customers, like the benefits of it, is we try to explain them that this is the contextualization. So for example, if you have a batch, well, the data is aggregated, pre-aggregated already for the batch. So you have your product, you have the different quality aspects, you might even have the operators who worked on that. So this is the goal of contextualizing the data. So you don't need to have somebody going in an Excel spreadsheet and trying to match times when they happen. Okay, right? And they extract data from one system and they copy paste that in columns in Excel. They try to match and the timestamps, the limit. Okay, there's a batch, start, batch, end. So today, there's a lot of the tools like that are already pre-made. They are event-based. So whenever an event is created, there is a start and an end time. So those are the drivers to start fetching the data for the context. And you can do so many things around that to justify your business values, right?
Yep, exactly. What's your perspective, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, the context is everything. Whether, Branko made a good example around sort of, event-based data, like a batch is a very classic example there. But it could be even in a continuous process where you make different products and you need to know, the temperature of the production line is very relative to what product you're making. And so we can't just look at a time series trend and say, is my temperature good or bad? We have to know what was being made when, and we have to know, the context of where we're supposed to be, what are our limits and targets for those different product types. So there's lots of examples of contextualization, and even from an asset perspective, where in the plant is this information coming from, so I can have some context on the sensor in the field, and those are all things that we've worked hard on in the product to make that, again, as easy to configure and then as easy for the user to take advantage of that configuration. And certainly we still have work to do, but an area of continued focus for us.
But I think also in that context, what you guys are doing good is you have the capability to put manual data as well. So it's not just getting the systems automated, they're integrated, and there's APIs, but sometimes you also need a capability, a functionality per se, to say, okay, I'm inputting manual data, right? And that's something that's also important, because that categorization cannot be easily achieved with some automated systems, but definitely the fact that there is that functionality, I think that's an added benefit. And another thing to say, for example, a data scientist that we have, and they get different mandates, they say, oh, can you do that? Well, they can say yes, but where's the data? What's the context? They'll start a pre-engineering work to say, okay, here's my confidence level, right? And they say, okay, we can deliver this. So if there is no context and a lot of data cleaning needs to be done, it gets kind of like tougher for the data scientist to say, okay, we can deliver that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we also get into the whole area of things like performance and speed and the architecture of the data. And I know that's probably a key part of the the data engineering of the project. I mean, we get into these customers that'll, it's like almost like if you're talking Branko with MES, do I want an on-prem MES? Do I want a cloud-based MES? But, kind of like, what are your thoughts on performance and speed, and how do you recommend architecting the data to kind of maximize that as part of the whole data engineering phase of the project?
I can go first.
Yeah.
Well, for us, definitely it's a big thing. So the structuring of that has to be like laid out. Performance is crucial, right? So let's say you're doing data analysis, you're doing your trends, you already pre-built your display, you know what you're looking for. and then accidentally, let's say, or something, you change the year, and then you're grabbing a year's worth of data, and it's like, oh no, I really hit that button.
Right.
This is where you're like, okay, you've reached the limit of your system, and sometimes you could even forget what you were working on. You lose the train of thought, and you also could be impacting the performances of your application, right? So remember what we talked about, having the operational database,
Yep.
the warehouse data lake. So if you're set up to report on the operational database, then the performance is very, very crucial, because depending on how you create your query, how you do your trend, how many variables you put in the trend, and different sampling rates, for example, if you take a raw values versus let's say, for example, a lab or different sampling type averages, well, you're going to ask more processing power from the server, right? And depending what kind of architecture you have in the back, well, it's going to yield the results that you asked. So I think that's also important to consider. Just, having a smart systems, not to lose performance and to affect your operations, right? Balance.
Yeah, absolutely. What your perspective, Kevin?
I mean, I think, Branko touched upon some of, I think, our and my key beliefs too around, you've got to keep people engaged when they're trying to solve a problem. And with, I think, with our kind of distributed workforce, especially in the last couple of years, and distributed data now with on-prem data centers, we this saying of make all data perform as if it's local. When back in the day when all data was on-prem and all people were on-prem, we had a pretty good shot at having relatively high performance. But now as everybody scatters and data scatters, that becomes a challenge. So from a dataParc standpoint, we've really added like a flexible architecture so that we can put different pieces of the software in different places of the whole system, try to make that data perform as if it's local, even if it's not. And then using some basically we call our performance data engine to kind of pre-aggregate long-term data. So in Branko's example of the person who accidentally grabbed a year of data, going to their production historian for that, they're going to an archive that's optimized for that long-term time series data. And his example was the accident, but sometimes that's intentional. You want to look at a year of data, or look at 2 years of data, look at some seasonality, and so to kind of be able to do that quickly and let people solve a problem in one sitting, not have to go get a cup of coffee or go ask their system admin to pre-configure something for them. Really, it can be the difference between solving a problem and not solving it.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's testing the scenarios. Yeah. Like, what if I add this variable? What if I add this data set? And then you kind of get like different analytics that you can use for the insights. But if your system doesn't give you those quick insights, then you're kind of like, as a data scientist, then you're like, oh, I can't work with this platform. Like, what is the benefit of it? So maybe you're going to be discouraged in your work that you're doing. So
yeah, because how often, I'm sure you've seen this, Branko, how often did the first question that you ask of the data is the last question that you ask of the data? I mean, it's just the beginning. The first question usually results in 5 more questions. And so you need the software to be kind of flexible so you can keep asking those questions and not just give up, right?
And one thing I've seen is like when we give a report to another person, they look at it and then they go, "Oh, what if you add this?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh, I didn't think of that. Wait, let me see." So then it's also the capacity of how fast you can adapt to provide another insight. So does it take you another week, let's say, or a day or an hour to reprocess all that data? So performance is there too, right? So being able to quickly go back and readjust your report or the insight you have provided. So right now, for example, data lakes, if you're reprocessing tons of video images, for example, for detection or replacing what a human can do with an eye, we have all these, we develop these protocols here, but how fast can you reprocess all that data with the video, right? The performance, when will you get that model updated? So that's kind of like in the same aspects of that.
Yeah, and the answer, I'm sure, with the videos, it's not, it doesn't happen very quickly.
Right.
So
Yeah, a lot of bandwidth, you know, that certainly takes a lot of time.
And one thing we've seen also along with the MES databases, and that's based on SQL. So SQL tables are pretty efficient in the beginning when you set them up and install them. But oftentimes we've seen that you need to have somebody doing the maintenance on them, right? So
absolutely.
like the key thing to consider, and it's part of our workshop. So once we start working with a team that desires to resolve problems, well, we can tell them ahead, okay, this is your infrastructure. You have a historian, you have a SQL databases, and again, talking to that RACI chart, the matrix. So we'll have a SQL maintenance team. They need to be informed. This is what we're doing. This is the new sensor we're adding. This is going to create more data. Oh, there's new events coming in. So definitely there's a lot of things to be looked at in that 20% of that pre-engineering work that we do, to making sure that the performance is also kept in.
Yeah, because it's got to sustain, right? Again, we got to solve these problems, not just for today, but, you know, for tomorrow and in the future.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think probably the last question from me before we get to audience Q&A, and obviously if there's anybody listening that has a question, please go to the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and leave us some questions, and we'll get to that. And we have also some other questions that people have submitted ahead of time that we'll get started with. But if you had any parting thoughts, Kevin, what few points would you want the listeners to take away from your perspective and the dataParc perspective?
I'd say, you know, certainly recognize, you know, the importance of this, you know, this pre-engineering phase, and keep in mind the big picture, because that's really what the, you know, the data engineering, in my mind, helps you going forward. You know, we can always solve a narrow problem with a narrow solution, but that doesn't really get you where you want to go in the long term. And so if we do the data engineering right, we're set up to solve problems today and tomorrow. And the workforce is just going to get more, you know, dispersed. I think data is going to get, again, more dispersed with different options. And so setting yourself up for a real kind of a future-proof system is really important. And that's what, you know, at dataParc, what we really want to do is, you know, make it easy to enable your people to solve problems. Okay, and Branko?
Yeah, on my end, I would say I would put it in numbers, 20-80.
Yeah.
So 20% of the work you put, you know, on your pre-engineering will help you resolve a potential 80% that's standing up there, and definitely following the defining your roadmap, the strategy, having the right people work with you on different projects, identifying the problems that you have and consequences, because not all problems could do catastrophic consequences. And oftentimes the management team will ask, okay, what is our return on investment in this? We are putting this solution in with this consulting services and this, okay, so how do we get our return on the investment? So that's also a part of the strategy to identify the gains, right? So there's less and less workforce, there's despair, there's data siloing and all that. So all that needs to be taken into account. So in a nutshell, I would say that 20-80 or 80-20.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah,
great
and I think, you know, Branko, just the more we talk here, the more, you know, kind of affirms, you know, the BBA approach, I think is one that really help customers be set up for that future success. and certainly I think it's important when customers are looking at implementing these solutions that they look at the right partner from a services perspective too.
Yeah, exactly. And I just forgot about one example that really stood out with a recent project we did is in a mining industry. There was a really complex manual job that the engineers were working there, and there was a lot of manual data that they had to work with. So we put in place a data conversion project where we were automating the exchanges of data and putting it in a centralized place. So process of getting everything together was around maybe in terms of 2 to 3 days to prepare this for analysis. And now it only takes like 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. So there's also the aspect of the people doing this work. They can have different tasks that are more value added, right? So within your organizations, you'll have people that are willing to work on things that are not mechanical, not repetitive. And if we have data systems that can do the job integration much quicker and much more reliable, then these smart people can do different things that are more value added.
I think too, you start to show people the data fast and show them the value of the data. Then they buy into the whole process more. I mean, they're more willing to work with you to get data in to make sure that it stays live and all the pieces stay alive because they see the value. You've now brought that data to the surface, and was before, it's a 3-day labor-intensive process, and they probably never see the results, and so they just do it because they're told to.
Exactly, the mechanical things, yeah.
And we really want to get to is, people do these tasks because they want to, they see the value, and they benefit from it too.
And they're going to be able to challenge the operations, right? Sometimes the insights that they'll get, and they'll say, hey, what are you guys doing? We have these indications. And that's how they can also challenge the other part, which is the operations. So you cannot improve. For example, if you're not gathering the information, you cannot improve. So you gotta gather, analyze, and then learn from your from the experiences you've done, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting,
kind of like an AI model, right? So that's how it works.
Exactly.
Rerun simulation with these parameters.
Yep, actually, sometimes we'll see a model where it actually integrates AI and IoT, and they call it an AIoT model.
Okay.
Trying to merge that together, as a part of convergence, I guess you might say, along with things like IT/OT convergence.
I think some marketing person had too much time on their hands, Craig, and had to come up with another acronym.
Right.
There's no shortage of those. It's funny. One of the questions that we get a lot, and I'd say this is a little bit more from the C-level executive that's trying to justify some of these projects like data engineering, is they'll say to us, okay, right now, I don't have a demand problem for my product. I have a supply chain problem. I can't, regardless of what kind of automation solution I have, if I don't have material, I can't build anything. So therefore, does it really matter? And one of the things that we're certainly trying to advise them is how important data engineering is, even to the visibility, to be able to not only see what's possibly coming and see what's not coming from your supply chain, but the ability to kind of make changes sometimes on the fly to your manufacturing process, because now you're dealing with a different supplier or some different raw material. So one of the things I think our listeners are going to want to hear is that if they get that question, which is, does it matter for us to invest in a data engineering solution if right now our only problem is I can't build enough of what we're selling, and our backlog is huge? Is what's the kind of the justification that they can use to say why it's still important to invest in data engineering, and can that add any value to helping them with their ultimate problem now, is how am I going to get material, and how am I going to re-engineer products so I can make it based on with the raw material I'm able to procure?
Well, that's definitely an interesting one, because a lot of customers are facing that. But if, for example, they would have been able to put in place smarter analytics on the plug on the market, and use it in an AI perspective to anticipate the
Mhm.
variations of the market and the suppliers, that's something that's going to raise the flags already. So I think being able to put in place a system or a group of systems that are going to gather the information on the outside world, so nothing to do with your operation within your plant, but the outside world. And there are tools available for that. There are APIs, there are REST services that you can subscribe to and get the different markets provisions and predictions. So I think that would be something to consider to implement at the other stages of the project.
Yeah. What do you say, Kevin, as far as the ways you're able to kind of help, sell dataParc is when you're hearing that same argument to help them really solve that, the whole, at least contribute to trying to solve the supply chain issue?
Yeah, the ROI question is always the hard one. There's never real clear answers, since we're not just putting in a more efficient motor that has a real definitive ROI. But I think in this case, kind of what Branko was mentioning is it's still a visibility problem.
Yep.
And creating visibility to the data that you have on the supply chain is important. Because it still is important for your operations. And I think even on the operational side, kind of what you're alluding to, Craig, is that you're still going to have some operational challenges, because you're going to try to make that product for your customer any way you can.
Absolutely.
And maybe you're used to getting it from this supplier, and you switch suppliers. Well, the runnability on your production line could be very different. And so having the ability to give those kind of operational analytics, which data engineering is the step one, but ultimately what we're trying to do is provide operational analytics to make our plant run better. That's still going to be a challenge in the supply chain world, because you're going to get creative. You're going to have different suppliers. Maybe you're going to try an alternate raw material that you've never tried before, and you need to be able to look at how operations run with that. So there's probably more challenges on the operation when you have supply chain problems because of what you are bringing in the front end of the plant. So
Yeah.
I just kind of try to get them focused on the that side of things, and they just have to it's really, these are strategic projects that benefit the plant in the long run, because the companies that were ready for this when COVID hit certainly benefited from being able to have their remote workforce working from day one. How many firewall companies had their best year ever in 2020?
VPN sales.
Because everyone's scrambling. So I just point to the there's still operational challenges and value.
Or maybe just reducing the waste. Maybe they are the materials they have in hand, they are wasting them. So the time now where the waste has to be brought down to very low levels to make sure not to waste that, because we can't get it because of the supply chain issues. And you need to have systems in place to measure waste day one, right? So quality is the key, but the waste that you generate needs to be accounted in systems. The operators need to have some kind of trends or reports, KPI dashboards for them to get aware of the situation of the waste. So they'll work closer with the machinery and the operations to keep that down. So I think maybe that could be part of something that we control. This is something we don't control. So
yeah, but one of the things that's critical is the next discussion we're having after supply chain, it's all about operational resilience. It's all about sustainability, per your point about trying to do a better job of conserving resources. The whole discussion certainly changed about energy when oil was, $30 a barrel instead of $100 a barrel, with an infinite supply versus certainly with with geopolitical issues as far as seeing some of that supply, possibly get disrupted. So one of the things that people are looking for on their solutions are things that help their sustainability and operational resilience and energy conservation. So make them also into something that's really, and so the ROI is really based on a sustainability which is obviously harder to measure. But they recognize that it's like insurance. It's like an insurance policy. It's like when we were putting in advising people to put in all those remote licenses for working at home. And then when the plants began, when the lockdowns ended and people started going to the plants, it was like, well, what are we going to do with these remote licenses now? And then we're like, you should probably need to still keep them because of the fact that you never know what's going to happen. And we've been going through this with some of our clients in China. And as they went into lockdown, how do they continue to maintain operations when they can't get personnel into the plant, or with social spacing, they can't get the same number of personnel in the plant? So it's this whole new normal of being able to do remote operations and make sure you have those tools available to have that, because that's part of anybody's operational resilience and sustainability, objectives.
Yeah. Great. And again, if you need to put systems to measure. So the data will come in, but you need to contextualize it. Yep. It could be another closing point is to make sure that your environmental data is sustainable, that you have targets, right? And in order you need to measure yourself versus the target that you're getting, plus all the government requirements that are going to be stricter and stricter on the emissions, especially around the metal and mining industry that we work on, the biofuels. So those industries are becoming more stricter, and there's a lot of data that needs to be extracted to provide proof, that we're good at that.
Absolutely. I'd say if I have a final question, it's really, we always people always like the Monday morning quarterback question, which is for the people who have for all the projects that you've been involved with, if there are things that you'd recommend that your customers say, boy, I wish I did something different. I wish I learned from, if I did this project a second time, I would have planned it differently. I would have implemented something differently. So from each of you, what would you say if you had to raise a Monday morning quarterback point for everybody to think about, saying that when you're doing this project, think about this first, because you may regret not doing it later.
I could go first.
Sure.
I could go first and last.
Sure.
So for me, I think it's defining the business requirements. Okay. Maybe on that Monday, you'll say, okay, I'm going to do this the right way. I'm going to put the right people on, and let's put those requirements on the paper, what they look like, and we're going to run with that. Because if somebody questions us and say, why are you guys doing it like this? You should be doing like this. Well, you can take out your requirements you built in with your team, and this is solid. So this is your game plan, and you're running with that. So I think I would do that on a Monday morning.
Yeah. I mean, I think along that theme, Branko, for us, a lot of times where projects could have gone better is it comes down to the people. And making sure that we have the right people in the project in the beginning, so that one, it goes really efficient, and two, people feel part of the solution. You're definitely going to get more buy-in when people are part of the project, and so I think taking a step, I like that, the idea of that kind of RACI diagram where you do put the responsibilities and you've got the right people on board in the beginning of the project. So I think that's always,
and
I think always it can be done a little better.
And also I think what you guys do good, Kevin, is you do a lot of education and training as well on your suite of applications. You don't let the customers down, and definitely that's something you coached us as well when we started the integration with you. So I think that's also important, is to get that training in and the willingness to participate. So I think that's a key for success as well.
Yeah.
That's true. And I'll tell you though, the one thing I've certainly learned doing projects with ARC is the earlier you get engagement and buy-in, where people feel they're part of the process and have an ownership stake, and they feel they have an ownership stake, and they feel as though they own a piece of that success and they want it to be successful. If it's one of those things that the C-levels have gotten together and they've decided we're going to do this and we'll tell you about it when we're ready, the whole culture issue just makes it an abysmal failure.
Yeah.
If people are brought in from the beginning where it's like, we want your opinion, we want your input, we respect it, and that's gonna be something that's gonna help us deploy this and make this successful. It makes 180-degree difference between a successful project and a non-successful project. So I mean, that would certainly be my Monday morning quarterback point for data engineering or any project within the plant. But all I can say is Branko and Kevin, you guys were great today. It was an excellent discussion. I really appreciate it. As we wrap up, there's going to be one question, kind of a post-webinar survey, which you'll see on the screen when you log out, which is how confident are you in the success of your next industrial analytics and digital transformation initiative. The choices will be not very confident, somewhat confident, mostly confident, and very confident. And if we won't answer this one in advance, but I probably have my own ways that I would see a lot of the ARC clients answering it. I'm sure Branko and Kevin, you probably do as well. But
feel free to contact me or Kevin anytime for it could be a small question. We're always there to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We can always help. And having been through this, Branko probably as much as anybody, let us know how we can help.
Excellent.
Great.
Well, again, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Branko. And thank you to all our listeners. This is CResnick with the ARC Advisory Group. Thanks very much for listening and have a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah. Bye now.